Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I first say that the UK is deeply concerned about rising tensions between India and Pakistan and urgently calls for restraint on both sides to avoid further escalation. We're in regular contact with both countries, urging dialogue and diplomatic solutions to ensure regional stability. We're working closely with international partners, including through the UN Security Council, to de-escalate tensions and are monitoring developments closely and considering implications for British nationals. Mr. Speaker, I understand that Eve Griffith-Okai in your office retires at the end of the week. She has worked for 4 speakers, and I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in wishing her the very best for the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the initial response. Mr. Speaker, in the face of her total failure to secure the agreement of this House, when will the Prime Minister call time on this farce, extend Article 50 and put her deal versus the Remain to the people?
First of all, can I say to the honourable gentleman, I made a statement in the House yesterday and answered 82 questions in the House yesterday on these issues. We will be bringing a meaningful vote back by the 12th of March. As I said yesterday, if that meaningful vote is rejected again by the House, then we would then, on the 13th of March, have a vote in this House on whether or not this House accepts leaving without a deal on the 29th of March. And if that is then, if the House rejects leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, then there would be a vote on a short, limited extension to Article 50. But on his final point, I continue to believe that actually it is right for us to deliver on the result of the referendum that took place in 2016.
Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2017 Birmingham bin strike led to mass fly tipping across the borough border in my beautiful town of Solihull. With the threat of another strike ever present, will the Prime Minister join me in urging Birmingham Council to do what often seems beyond it? Be a good neighbour, sort out these strikes, which seem just a taster for what would happen under a hard-left Labour government.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, obviously this is a matter for Birmingham City Council to resolve, for Labour-controlled Birmingham City Council to resolve. Rubbish piling up on the streets because of the failure of a Labour council to get a grip. I think not only does it show what a hard-left Labour government would be like, it also shows all of us that under Labour councils you pay more and get less.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is an urgent question coming up on Kashmir, but just to say this, that from our side of the House we strongly support dialogue, rapid dialogue between India and Pakistan in order to reduce the conflict, reduce the tensions and deal with the root causes of it before more lives are lost. I also join the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, in wishing Eve a very happy retirement. She's been absolutely brilliant in your office, and over many years of people rushing in and out of your office making totally unreasonable demands, she's always sorted it out. So could you pass on to her the thanks of lots and lots of backbenchers over many, many years? Mr. Speaker, the Bank of England forecasts that growth for this year will be the slowest in over a decade. Does the Prime Minister blame her shambolic handling of Brexit or her failed austerity policies for this damaging failure?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, first I think he should have seen the report that actually showed that the expectation is that we will have higher growth in this country over the coming year than they will have in Germany. But he talks about the economy. Let's just say what we see in the economy under a Conservative government. More people in work than ever before. Unemployment at its lowest level since the 1970s. Borrowing this year at its lowest level for 17 years. And the largest monthly surplus on record. Conservatives delivering more jobs, healthier finances, an economy fit for the future.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is very busy, I understand that, but she possibly hasn't had a chance to look at the Bank of England forecasts, which suggest there's a 1 in 4 chance of the UK economy dipping into recession. Manufacturing is already in recession. Car manufacturing declined at the steepest rate for a decade, down 5% in the last quarter alone. Honda, Jaguar, Land Rover and Nissan have either announced cuts to jobs or investment in recent months. Does the Prime Minister blame her shambolic Brexit or her government's lack of industrial strategy for this very sad state of affairs?
Yes, thank you, right honourable gentleman. I've just explained to him what we see in positives of this under this government in relation to this economy and the consistent growth quarter by quarter that we have seen in our economy under this government. And what do we know would be worst thing for the economy in this country? It would be a run on the pound, capital flight and 1,000 billion of borrowing under a Labour government.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, as manufacturing industry declines, it's skilled, well-paid jobs that are lost. But the Prime Minister is right, there is something that's increasing, and that is the income of the top fifth richest people in this country, which went up by 4.7% last year, while incomes of the poorest fell by 1.6%. With the poorest people worse off, will the Prime Minister now commit to ending the benefit freeze, or does she believe that rising poverty is a price worth paying?
Well, perhaps it might help again to look at some of the facts. The top 1% are paying 28% of income tax. That's higher than at any time under a Labour government. Income inequality is lower than that we inherited from a Labour government. And the lowest earners saw their fastest pay rise in 20 years through the national minimum living wage. That's Conservatives building a fairer society and delivering for everyone.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Some of us cannot forget it was the Conservative Party that so opposed the principle of the national minimum wage from the very beginning. But, Mr. Speaker, the government could perhaps start tackling the scourge of low pay in their own departments. The Business and Justice departments pay some of their central London workers as little as £7.83 per hour. And they've been on strike again this week, hoping to get a London living wage. Could the Prime Minister intervene and make sure they do get the London living wage so they can continue doing their very valuable work for both of those departments? Low pay, Mr. Speaker, means many workers have to claim universal credit just to make ends meet. This month, the Work and Pensions Secretary admitted that universal credit is driving people to food banks. Isn't it time to stop the rollout and get it right? Or does she believe that rising poverty is a price worth paying?
No. Yes. I'm not sure whether the right honourable gentleman was repeating his previous question, but can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, he talks about universal credit. What we have said with universal credit is that as we roll it out, we have made changes to it as we have seen how it has been operating. In my first months as Prime Minister, we cut the taper rate so people could keep more of what they earn. Since then, we've increased allowances to 100% of a full monthly payment. We've scrapped the 7 waiting days. That means that people get their money sooner, and we've brought in a 2-week overlap for those people who are on housing benefit. The question is why, when we were making all those changes to universal credit to benefit the people who are getting universal credit, did the Labour Party oppose every single one of them?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Can I just give one example, Mr. Speaker, of what's happening? Take, for example, the food bank in Hastings, represented by the DWP Secretary. Its demand has gone up by 80% after universal credit was rolled out. And the Trussell Trust reports that a significant proportion of referrals are relating to benefit changes, delays or sanctions, a huge increase in food bank uses. Mr. Speaker, 4.1 million of our children are growing up in poverty. Last week, the Resolution Foundation said that UK child poverty was on course to hit record levels. Will the Prime Minister take action to prevent this? Will she start by ending the 2-child limit? Will she end the benefit cap? Will she restore the 1,000 Sure Start centres that have been lost under her government?
What can I say to the right honourable gentleman? As we look at the welfare system, what we want to ensure is that we have a welfare system that is fair to those who need to use the welfare system, but is also fair to all those people, those hard-working taxpayers, whose taxes actually go to pay for the welfare system. He talks about child poverty. Absolute child poverty is at a record low, and we know that a child growing up in a home where all the adults work is around 5 times less likely to be in poverty than a home where nobody works. And under this government, the number of children in workless households is at a record low. So when he stands up, will he recognise that work is the best route out of poverty? And will he recognise that while we're talking of work, he should welcome the fact that we now have more people in work than ever before? 3.5 million more people than in 2010.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it clearly isn't working because so many people who are themselves working very hard, sometimes doing 2 or even 3 jobs, have to access food banks just to feed their children. She used to talk about the just about managing. Well, they're not managing anymore. Income inequality is up. In-work poverty, up. Child poverty, up. Pensioner poverty, up. Homelessness, up. Mr. Speaker, austerity is clearly not over. People on low incomes are getting poorer, while those at the top are getting richer. The economy is slowing, manufacturing is in recession, and this government's shambolic handling of Brexit.
The right honourable gentleman will not be shouted down. It isn't going to happen. The attempt is foolish. It demeans the House. Stop it. Grow up. Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, austerity is clearly not over. People on low income are getting poorer, while those at the top get richer. The economy is slowing, manufacturing is in recession, and this government's shambolic handling of Brexit is compounding years of damaging austerity. Their policies are driving people to food banks and poverty in the 5th richest economy on this planet. Are any of these burning injustices a priority for the Prime Minister?
Right honourable gentleman, manufacturing is not in recession. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that it is not the case. It is not the case of what he says about the lowest earners. As I said earlier, if he'd listened to my answer, the lowest earners have seen the highest rise in their pay for 20 years as a result of the introduction of the national living wage. The national living wage introduced by a Conservative-led government. And if he's talking about actually helping people who are in work, let's talk about the fact that we've cut income tax to help people keep more of what they earn. We've frozen fuel duty, so we're helping people where the car is a necessity, not a luxury. Since 2010, those measures have saved working people £6,500. From the way the right honourable gentleman talks, you'd have thought that he would have supported them. But what did he do? No, he's voted against them over a dozen times. And that's the reality. It's working people who always pay the price of labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For rural areas, access to emergency care is hugely important, with distances and journey times extremely crucial. Does the Prime Minister therefore agree with me and the 40,000 Pembrokeshire people who've signed the petition against proposals to remove A&E from the local hospital that the Welsh Government need to look again at this and ensure that communities like mine aren't left with second-class services that put lives at risk?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for raising this issue? And obviously I recognise when the concern that people feel when they're particularly those who will be living furthest away from the planned new hospital. As he has said in his question, obviously health is a devolved matter for the Labour Welsh Government. But I would urge them fully to consider the impact of these changes on local residents. We want to be able to ensure that people can access the services they need wherever they live in the United Kingdom.
Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the House will want to join me in welcoming the President of the Dutch Senate and the Dutch parliamentarians that are with us. Goedemiddag, hartelijke welkom, dames en heren. Mr. Speaker, 100,000 jobs in Scotland are under threat from a no-deal Brexit. The Scottish Government's top economic advisor has warned that this could create a recession worse than the 2008 financial crisis. The Prime Minister must rule out no deal right here, right now. Why is she still blackmailing the people of this country?
The right honourable gentleman might not be surprised if I point out to him that there are only two ways for ensuring that no deal is taken off the table. And it's no good members of the SNP shaking their head or muttering from a sedentary position. They need to face up to the facts. We will not revoke Article 50 because we're leaving the European Union. So the only way to take no deal off the table is to vote for the deal.
Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it will be for Parliament to decide. And of course, there are other options. We can extend Article 50 and we can have a people's vote. Prime Minister, look at the faces of her colleagues. She is fooling no one. Parliament will not be bullied into a false choice of accepting her very bad deal or no deal at all. MPs from Scotland must now decide. Will they stand up for Scotland or will they stand up with the extreme Brexiteers and the Tory benches? Today the Scottish National Party will move an amendment to rule out no deal under any and all circumstances. Scottish MPs can back the SNP or betray voters in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally end this Brexit madness and vote for the SNP amendment tonight?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about an extension to Article 50 or a second referendum. That doesn't actually solve the problem. That doesn't deal with the issue. The issue is very simple. Do we want to leave with a deal or without a deal? And that's the question that SNP MPs and every other MP will face when the time comes. But then he talks about betraying voters in Scotland. I'll tell him what's betrayed voters in Scotland. As SNP Scottish Government that has raised income tax, so people in Scotland are paying more in income tax than anywhere else in the UK. An SNP Scottish Government that has broken its manifesto promise and raised the cap on annual council tax increases for homeowners. And an SNP Scottish Government that means people are facing the prospect of an extra tax for parking their car at their workplace. And all of that...
Order! There is a festive, undignified arm-waving and bellowing, Mr. Kerr, from a sedentary position. Calm yourself, man. Take some sort of soothing medicament which you will find beneficial. The Prime Minister...
And all of that in a year in which the Scottish Government's block grant from Westminster went up. The real people betraying the people of Scotland are the SNP Scottish Government.
James Cleverly!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, we heard of the horrific anti-Semitic attack on an elderly Jewish gentleman in North London. Tonight, honourable and right honourable colleagues from across the House will be breaking bread with the Community Security Trust, a charity that exists to defend against anti-Semitic violence. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that we can never be too blasé about anti-Semitism? We can never be too tolerant of anti-Semitism, and the party opposite can never be too apologetic about anti-Semitism.
Can I say, first of all, I'd like to join my honourable friend in recognising the work that is done by the Community Security Trust. They do such important and valuable work throughout the year, and I'm pleased that the government is able to support the work they do. My honourable friend is absolutely right. You can never be too apologetic about anti-Semitism. But I think this actually what we've heard sums up Labour under their leader. They lose the honourable member for Liverpool Wavertree and they keep the honourable member for Derby North. It tells you all you need to know about the Labour leadership, present but not involved. And perhaps perhaps if the Labour leader actually wants to take action against racism, he would suspend the honourable member for Derby North.
Order. The honourable lady must be heard. Layla Moran.
Mr. Speaker, one homeless person dying on our streets is enough for a national shame. Yet the latest figures show that in 2017 there were nearly 600. And in that same year, the Vagrancy Act was used over 1,000 times to drag homeless people before our courts. Crisis, Centrepoint, St Mungo's and MPs on both sides of this House are agreed it's time to scrap this law. Would the Prime Minister consider meeting with us and the charity so we can make the case for why we shouldn't wait one more day?
Here. I say to the honourable lady, as I think I indicated in the Prime Minister's questions in answer to questions last week, we have seen, certainly in terms of the number of people sleeping on our streets, we've seen those numbers down for the first time in 8 years. But of course, there is more to do on that issue, on the wider issue of homelessness. There's more to do in terms of building more homes, and we are doing that. But I will ensure that the relevant minister from the relevant department meets the honourable lady to discuss this.
Mr. Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in North Point House, in my constituency in Bromley, have ACM cladding on their building. They are paying out £5,000 a week for a waking watch. Repairs, remediation will cost £3 million. They have a fire brigade enforcement notice expiring on the 30th of April. The flats are valueless. They cannot raise the money against them. The freeholders and the developer, despite personal intervention by the Secretary of State, for which I am grateful, refuse to accept liability. Under those circumstances, will the government accept it may be necessary to intervene directly to ensure that those innocent flat owners are not out of pocket?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, he's obviously raised a very important issue, and I know, as he said, he's been in touch with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and also with the Treasury about this. We, as I've said previously, we do fully expect building owners in the private sector to take action, make sure appropriate safety measures are in place and not to pass costs on to leaseholders, and we've written to all relevant building owners reminding them of their responsibilities. They must do the right thing, and if they don't, we're not ruling anything out. I would also point out to my honourable friend that local authorities have the power to complete works and recover the costs from the private owners of high-rise residential buildings. But I'm sure that a minister from the MHCLG would be happy to meet with my honourable friend to continue to discuss this matter to ensure that the residents are given the peace of mind they need by the action being taken.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, the government has just decided that imports of medical supplies are to be handled by the same company that forced hundreds of restaurants to close because it was incapable of delivering chicken to KFC. It is literally horrifying that the PM's stubbornness is literally putting people's lives at risk through bargain bucket supply deals. So what guarantee can she give to patients who are watching us now, looking at this pantomime and farce in this House now? What guarantee can she give that they will be able to get their vital medicines when they need them in the event of that no-deal Brexit?
I say to the honourable lady that the Department for Health and Social Care is taking the steps necessary to ensure that medicines are available. We've been clear before that it is not necessary and patients should not be stockpiling medicines. The medicines will be available. But if the honourable lady is so concerned about the impact of no deal, then it's no good the honourable lady shaking her head. There is a very simple answer. If she doesn't want no deal, she should support the deal.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Sun newspaper reported yesterday of a £1.6 billion post-EU fund for deprived areas in the north, predominantly held by opposition MPs. Will my right honourable friend ensure that this fund is available to constituencies like mine in Harlow, where we have significant deprivation and disadvantage?
First of all, can I say to my right honourable friend, we will be introducing a fund to ensure our towns can grow and prosper and the details of this will be announced in due course by my Right Honourable friend, the Communities Secretary. But I can confirm to my Right Honourable friend that Harlow and indeed other towns across England will be able to bring forward ambitious plans to help transform their communities, and of course we'll be working with the devolved administrations and working in Northern Ireland to ensure that towns in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland also benefit from town deals.
Sir David Crosby.
As a former shop steward and works convener, I completely understand the need to approach the cliff edge in order to secure a deal. But rational negotiators never go to the edge, hold hands and jump into the abyss. So when will the Prime Minister recognise that constructive discussions should take place without the nuclear option of mutually assured destruction?
Say to the honourable gentleman, constructive discussions are taking place. This House was clear what it wanted to see changed in relation to the withdrawal agreement and the package, the deal that we had brought back from the European Union, and we're making progress and having exactly the constructive discussions he's talking about.
George Freeman.
Mr. Speaker, public trust in politics is dangerously low. Failing to honour and deliver the EU referendum result cannot be an option. I campaigned to remain, but I'm 100% committed to leaving. The question is how. Most of my voters in mid-Norfolk said they wanted to be in the common market, not a political union. Given the clear warnings from the life science and agriculture sectors, key industries in Norfolk, about the danger of no deal, could I welcome the Prime Minister's decision to give this sovereign House the vote and ask that if the House votes against, she'll look at EFTA instead of the backstop, giving us the common market 2.0 that most British voters want.
Say to my honourable friend, as I said yesterday in the answer to questions, I think it was in answer to a question from our Right Honourable friend, the member for Harlow, the first aim of the government, and my first aim, is to bring back a meaningful vote that can command support across the House, such that we are able to leave with a deal. And the arrangements within the political declaration, I believe, have significant benefits in relation to issues such as customs, but they also provide for us to have an independent trade policy and to bring an end to free movement. And my honourable friend talks about trust in politics. I believe those were important elements of what people voted for in 2016, and it's important that we deliver on that.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister previously committed to a meaningful vote on her Brexit deal, but had to be forced by the courts to hold it. She then committed to that meaningful vote in December, but pulled it at the last minute. And when her deal fell to the worst government defeat in history, instead of listening to MPs, she carried on regardless. So I ask the Prime Minister, what guarantee will she give this House, other than her word, that we will be able to vote to stop a no-deal Brexit before the 29th of March?
Can I say to the honourable lady, I set out clearly in my statement yesterday, I have repeated it in answer to a question today, the process that the government will follow. We want to leave. The government policy is to leave with a deal. We are working to ensure that we can bring back that deal. She talks about the rejection of the meaningful vote and not listening to Parliament. Actually, the constructive discussions I'm having with the European Union at the moment are exactly about listening to Parliament, because on the 29th, well, it's all very well the Shadow Trade Secretary shouting nonsense. He might not have noticed that on the 29th of January, this House voted by a majority to say what it wanted to see changed in the withdrawal agreement, and that's what we're working on.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Little moves us more than the death of a child, and for bereaved parents, that grief is beyond words. Actions speak louder, which is why I've championed, inspired by the Honourable Lady from Swansea East, the Children's Funeral Fund. Will the Prime Minister tell us when the good work of her Minister, the member for Charnwood, will come to fruition, and that fund will begin to bring support and solace? Mr. Speaker, we can't mend broken hearts here, but those who've loved and lost deserve better than delay and doubt.
Can I thank my right honourable friend, and can I thank him for the work that he has done on this issue together with the honourable member for Swansea East. I think it is accepted across the House that it isn't right that grieving parents have to worry about how to meet the funeral costs when they've lost a child. And we have, as he knows, confirmed that parents will no longer have to meet the costs of burials or cremations. Fees will be waived by local authorities and paid for by the government. The relevant ministries have been working on the most effective way to deliver this, and I can confirm that this will be implemented by the summer.
Bambos Charalambos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few months in my constituency, a 98-year-old man was killed in an aggravated burglary. An Asian couple were robbed, held hostage and beaten in their home. School children were mugged at knife point, and a spate of burglaries have been committed across Enfield Southgate. My constituents do not feel safe. Does the Prime Minister recognise the severe consequences of underfunding our police service, and will she commit to restoring funding for community policing to pre-2010 levels?
To the honourable gentleman, of course, we recognise concerns that there are about serious violence. It's why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has brought forward things like the Offensive Weapons Bill, the Serious Violence Strategy, setting up the Serious Violence Task Force. In relation to funding for the police, the Metropolitan Police will receive up to £2.5 billion in funding in 2019-20. That's an increase of up to £172 million on 2018-2019. But if he also wants to ask questions about funding for police in London, perhaps he should speak to the Labour Mayor of London.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the government's review of higher education still underway, does the Prime Minister agree that the reintroduction of maintenance grants would be one outcome that could clearly aid social mobility for more disadvantaged students?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, I recognise that she has been a huge champion for social mobility and continues to be championing that social mobility. She is asking me to provide a solution in relation to higher education funding and student finance before the Auger report has been received and has been published. All I can do is assure her that obviously the work has been going on by Philip Auger and his panel in relation to looking at this, and we will look very seriously at the proposals they bring forward.
Mr. Stephen Hepburn.
In my constituency of Jarrow, there's a wonderful young lady, 4-year-old Harriet Corr, whose life would improve dramatically if she had access to the cystic fibrosis drug Ocrambi. It's available in Ireland and many other European countries and is due to become available in Scotland. Will the Prime Minister intervene personally in the negotiations between the NHS and Vertex to ensure that Harriet's family are not forced to leave their home and move elsewhere, along with many other families in the country?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, obviously I'm sure the whole House will recognise the concerns of Harriet and her family in relation to this issue. We do want to ensure that patients have access to the most effective and innovative medicines, but obviously at a price that represents value to the NHS. And NHS England has proposed its best ever offer for a drug, and this offer is the largest ever commitment of its kind in the 70-year history of the NHS. It would guarantee immediate and expanded access to both Ocambi and the drug Calideco for patients who need it. We've been following closely the discussions. The Secretary of State for Health and Social Care has offered a meeting with the global CEO of Vertex, NHS England and NICE in an effort to move this forward for the benefit of patients.
John Whittingdale.
Is my right friend aware that 5 years ago today, Russian special forces seized the government buildings in Crimea and raised the Russian flag? Will my right friend confirm that the UK government remains committed to the restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty over Crimea, and will she look at strengthening sanctions against Russia until that can be achieved?
I'm very happy to give that confirmation to my right honourable friend. This was an illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia, and we have been doing everything in relation to sanctions that we can to ensure that the appropriate sanctions are imposed that will have an impact. We have been one of the voices around the EU Council table that has been advocating at every stage not just the rollover of sanctions, but ensuring that as we look at the actions of Russia here and elsewhere, we enhance those sanctions and rightfully put pressure on those who are responsible.
Angela Crawley.
Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Government have used their powers to increase carers' allowance to the level of job seekers' allowance. Yet, because carers' allowance is regarded as income under universal credit, this top-up is being undermined. Can I ask the Prime Minister, if carers' allowance is meant to help cover the extra costs incurred by providing care, then why are carers on universal credit being penalised?
Good question, Angela.
The Honourable Lady will know full well the way in which universal credit operates in order to encourage people to come into work, but I will, in relation to this matter, I will ask the Minister in the relevant department to write to her.
Kapow!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of young girls, including, sadly, some from Taunton Deane, are purchasing so-called quick-fix diet and detox products, often endorsed by celebrities on social media, and these celebrities can be paid thousands of pounds for doing this. NHS chiefs say that some of these products can have highly detrimental health effects and are heaping work on our mental health services. So in Eating Disorder Week and following the excellent Westminster Hall debate by my right honourable friend this morning from Angus, would the Prime Minister agree with me that this irresponsible and unsafe endorsement of these products should be addressed?
Can I say to my honourable friend, she's raised a very important issue, and I'm sure all members of this House have had constituency cases where they've seen the impact that eating disorders can have on individuals, but also on their families and friends, and that impact can be devastating. Obviously, the government has been taking steps over the last few years. We've invested £150 million, we announced that in 2014, to expand eating disorder community-based care for children and young people, and as a result 70 dedicated new or extended community services offer care. But my honourable friend has raised a very important issue, which is about how young people may be encouraged to take products because of their celebrity endorsement, and the celebrities who are doing that should think very carefully about the impact that these products can have in having that effect of eating disorders, which devastates these lives.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and indeed the entire House knows the conditions under which her withdrawal agreement will have a majority. And the whole House and indeed the country now knows that as a result of yesterday's events, the prospects of the Prime Minister being able to achieve the necessary changes have been undermined and her negotiating position has been weakened. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. And can we have an assurance in terms of any possible extension? And I'd be interested to know what the Prime Minister thinks the purpose of the extension would be. But can we be assured that she will continue to focus on getting those legally binding changes? And hopefully during any future negotiation she will not be undermined in the way that she has been so far.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, we are continuing to press for those legally binding changes. Those are the discussions we've been having with the European Commission. It is what I have spoken to every European Union leader about over the last 10 days or so. It's what I was speaking to people about at Sharm el-Sheikh over the weekend as well. He talks about the extension to Article 50. Can I be very clear again? The government doesn't want to extend Article 50. The government's policy is to get the legally binding changes so a deal can be brought back to this House and this House can support the deal and we can leave on the 29th of March with a deal.
Dan Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Unlike some ministers who cannot normally take the view of the Prime Minister as being her word and being binding, I do take the Prime Minister's word as being binding. Can I ask that the Prime Minister reiterates our manifesto commitment to leave with a deal or to leave with no deal? And that is our commitment.
Can I say to my honourable friend that indeed we have, and I've always said no deal is better than bad deal. I think we've actually got a good deal from the European Union. It provides for citizens' rights, it provides certainty for business with the implementation period, it ensures that we have in the political declaration the arrangements for customs in the future for no tariffs, no quotas, no rules of origin, and it covers a number of other areas that I think will be positive, will indeed be positive for this country. There is an issue that the House wants to see changed. That's what we're working on in relation to the Northern Ireland backstop. I want us to leave with a deal. I want to be able to bring back a deal that this House can support.
Mary Rimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Violet Grace Ewins was walking home from nursery with her grandma on March 24, 2017. She was hit by a stolen car driven erratically at 83 miles an hour in a 30-mile zone. The driver and his accomplice immediately left the scene, the driver absconding the country. Tragically, 4-year-old Violet Grace died in her parents' arms the following day, and her grandma suffers with life-changing injuries. The offenders have since been sentenced to tariffs that do not fit the gravity of the crimes. In October 2017, the government published the response to the consultation on driving offences and penalties relating to causing death or serious injury and confirmed proposals. to increase the maximum penalty for causing death by dangerous driving from 14 years imprisonment to life, along with other tariffs for serious driving offences, and stated that government would bring forward proposals for reform of the law as soon as parliamentary time allows. Today, after just 1 week, the public petition Violet Grace's law stands at more than 74,000. The government is repeating the same response.
Order. This is a matter of the utmost sensitivity. I respect that, and that's why I'm allowing the Honourable Lady to go way beyond the normal length. But she must now put a question with a question mark. One sentence to wrap it up very well. Thank you. Mary Rimmer.
Prime Minister, when does the government truly intend to bring the proposals for the reform of the law?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, I'm sure that the feelings of the whole House will be with Violet Grace's family at this terrible tragedy that has occurred. And I know from a constituency case that I had the concern that parents and family members and others have when they see somebody who has caused a death in this way by their driving being sentenced to a tariff which they feel is less than it should be. The government has taken this very seriously. That's why we've had the consultation, and we will indeed bring forward our proposals when parliamentary time does allow. But I will ask a minister to meet with the Honourable Lady to discuss this matter with her.
Thank you. Mr. Peter-Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether you were as surprised as I was yesterday, but yet again the media had verbatim reports of the Cabinet meeting straight after. In fact, they referred to colleagues in front of me as kamikaze pilots. Prime Minister, to sort this issue out, would it just be easier to televise Cabinet meetings?
I want to hear the Prime Minister's answer. This is a very important question. Let's hear the answer. The Prime Minister.
Can I say, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't sure when you were doing a thumbs up when that was after that question was whether that indicated that you had a view on the televising of Cabinet meetings or not. Can I say to my honourable friend, he has tried various ways to approach this issue. I seem to remember last time he asked me this question, it wasn't about televising Cabinet, it was actually about sending his CV in to be a Cabinet Minister. Perhaps these are linked. Perhaps he wants to sit round the Cabinet table and be on the television all the time.
Well, we never knew that the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Wellingborough, had such ambitions, but maybe it lurks within him. Who knows? For my own part, I was merely acknowledging welcome and friendly visitors to the House. Order. Urgent question, Debbie Abrahams.
To ask the Foreign Secretary if he'll make a statement on the security and humanitarian situation in Kashmir in light of the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan.
Minister Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the Prime Minister made reference to this earlier during the course of Prime Minister's question time. May I say to the Honourable Lady, the UK is and remains deeply concerned about the rising tensions between India and Pakistan. Understandably, there has been huge interest in this rapidly developing situation. This House will understand it would not be appropriate for me to comment in detail on reportage at this time as the situation evolves. However, what we do understand is that on the 14th of February, at least 40 paramilitary Indian police officers were killed in a suicide attack in India-administered Kashmir. The Pakistan-based militant group Jaish-e-Mohammed claimed responsibility for that attack, and India-Pakistan tensions, already at a high level, rose significantly following that attack, and both countries publicly exchanged heated rhetoric. On Tuesday, the 26th of February, India and Pakistan news reported that Indian jets had crossed the line of control between India and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. There have been further reports of ceasefire violations across the line of control overnight, and the situation remains unclear but fast developing. The Foreign Secretary spoke to his Indian and Pakistani counterparts on Monday to discuss this situation, and we are in regular contact with both countries at senior levels to encourage restraint and to avoid escalating tensions further. We are monitoring developments closely and considering the implications for British nationals. I shall be speaking to both the Indian and Pakistani High Commissioners this afternoon and will continue to press for the importance of restraint. We urge both sides to engage in dialogue and to find diplomatic solutions to ensure regional stability. We are working closely with international partners, including through the United Nations Security Council, to de-escalate tensions. Now, India and Pakistan, Mr. Speaker, are both long-standing and important friends of the United Kingdom. We have many and significant links to both countries through sizable diaspora communities. As a consequence, we enjoy strong bilateral relationships with both nations. The UK government's position on Kashmir remains that it is and must be for India and Pakistan to find a lasting political resolution to the situation, taking into account the wishes of Kashmiri people. It isn't for the UK to prescribe, to intervene, or to interfere with a solution or to act as a mediator. Now, I know that the House has previously raised concerns about the humanitarian and human rights situation in both India-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. We continue to monitor the situation, and we encourage all states to ensure their domestic standards are in line with international standards.
Libby Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, and can I just thank you for granting this urgent question, and I'm grateful to the Minister for his response. But this has been an ongoing situation since independence in 1947, and successive governments have failed in dealing with the issues associated with Kashmir to help facilitate peace alongside our international allies. So the Minister, as he's said, is aware of the recent aerial attacks from India and then Pakistan, following on from the militant attack in the Pulwama district of Jammu and Kashmir and the death of the 40 Indian troops. This is a proscribed group in Pakistan, and I understand that they are said to be apparently based there, but as I say, they have been proscribed by Pakistan. I'm grateful to the Minister for reporting on the action he's already taken and the dialogue he's already had with counterparts in the High Commission for India and Pakistan, and I'd be grateful if he could report back once he's had meetings on this, because it is a very fast-moving situation. What specifically is mentioned the UN Security Council? What specific action has been decided around there? India said airstrikes in Balakot in northwestern Pakistan yesterday were in response to the militant attack and killed a large number of militants, but Pakistan said there were no casualties. So again, could the Minister clarify these reports? Today, Pakistan claims to have shot down 2 Indian jets when they entered Pakistani airspace. And the Indian news agency ANI has reported that a Pakistani jet has also shot down on the Pakistan side of the line of control. So again, if the Minister is able to expand on some of this information, that would be very helpful. In light of the escalation in military action, will the Foreign Secretary be altering his travel advice to UK citizens? The Minister knows that there is a large Kashmiri diaspora in the UK, many of whom have family who are still based there, and this is a real concern for them around their safety. The escalating tensions, as I say, have had a profound effect on our communities. So what assurance can he give them that the UK government is doing all it can to not just de-escalate tensions now, but work towards a sustainable peace in the region? Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. This isn't just an issue for the region, it is an issue for the whole world. Mr. Speaker, as the chair of the Kashmir APPG, I have repeatedly reiterated our commitment to support a process of peace and reconciliation in the region. But the UK government needs to step up and help facilitate this alongside our international partners. We have a vital role to play, as I say, not just in de-escalation, but also in terms of sustainable peace. And I urge the Minister to do all that he can to do this. Thank you.
May I thank the Honourable Lady for her calm and wise words, and may I also say I appreciate that she has a busy day today already with huge amounts going on near her own constituency with the large-scale fires. So I think we're very grateful for the work, and we all recognise, I think, as members of Parliament, that we are torn sometimes between the important international issues that are also close to our hearts, as well as dealing at a very, what might seem a parochial level, but nonetheless I'm very grateful for her words and her words of calm. May I just say, in relation to the UN specifically, she is right that this is a UN issue of some urgency, simply because obviously both Pakistan and India are nuclear nations, and therefore it is all the more important that we try and dial down some of the rhetoric and indeed, dare I say it, some of the actions that we have seen in recent days. And I think there are many friends of India and of Pakistan, of Kashmir, not just here in the UK but across the world, who are doing their best to try to calm that down. She will appreciate, I hope, that to clarify, as she has requested on some of the reports, and she made reference obviously to reports of Indian planes having been shot down over the last 24 hours. I don't want, and I hope she will understand why I don't want to be drawn into comment on this, because it is a fluid situation. Many of these reports are unconfirmed, and therefore, I think the most important thing, as I say, is to try and produce a slightly calmer approach. If I may just say on the issue of travel advice that she also requested, we are very closely monitoring the situation, and we shall keep our travel advice under constant review and update regularly, not just in the Kashmir, but obviously in other countries. And I should perhaps say, if I may, to the Honourable Lady, I am going to be in the region, as it happens, on a long pre-arranged trip, provided we can get out of this place with Brexit votes. Anyway, later on, I'm hoping to go tomorrow morning for 3 days to India, and obviously this is an issue that is fast-moving, and I will speak not just with our High Commissioner out in New Delhi, but obviously with counterparts both there and in Mumbai.
Mr. Bob Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the Honourable Lady for gaining this urgent question on this very tense position. Can I thank the Minister for his solid answers thus far? And clearly the escalating tension emanates from this terrorist suicide attack by Jaish-e-Mohammed on the 14th of February. This group are based in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and in Pakistan. So clearly the answer to this is that Pakistan has to take action to dismantle the terrorist camps and organise so that the terrorists are brought to justice. So will my honourable friend tell the Pakistani High Commission to own up to their responsibilities and make sure that the terrorists face justice?
Listen, I have a lot of respect for my honourable friend who takes a great interest in these issues. However, I think he is making some categorical statements that are not entirely supportable at this point. And as I say, I think it is important for all of us as members of Parliament with significant diaspora, and I know that it is predominantly obviously Indian diaspora in his own Harrow East constituency, but with all of us to try and calm feelings and try and de-escalate some of the concerns, not least as this is a fast-moving situation. I think it is fair to say, however, that Jaish-e-Mohammed have claimed responsibility for the 14th of February attack. The UK will continue to support a listing of that organisation and indeed its leader, Masood Azhar, under the UN Security Council Resolution 1267. The organisation itself has been listed since 2001 by the UN, and Masood Azhar is the head of that organisation. But I think it is, very premature to start making categorical statements about any involvement by Pakistan in this issue. And obviously we will keep this under review, and I will endeavour to speak, as I say, with both the Indian and Pakistani High Commissioners this afternoon to ask them for any updates on the situation.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And I'd like to thank the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth for securing it, and the members for Bradford West and Bolton South East, who I also know sought an urgent question today as well. At the outset, let me begin by making it quite clear that we condemn the despicable terror attack carried out in Pulwama on February the 14th, and I believe that we speak on behalf of the whole House when we do so. India has been absolutely right to take action against the terrorist group responsible and to urge Pakistan to follow suit. It is also high time that China lifted its veto so the UN can designate the head of JEM as a global terrorist. But will the Minister also join me in urging the Indian authorities at national and regional level to protect those innocent civilians of Kashmiri origin who have faced reprisals across India following the Pulwama attack? In terms of airstrikes and dogfights of the last 2 days, will the Minister of State join me in calling for immediate talks between India and Pakistan to de-escalate that crisis, but in also urging them to put an immediate stop to any military activity that risks escalating it further? We have heard both sides claim that their actions have simply been designed to send a message. But it is all too easy in those situations for messages to be misinterpreted and for grave and fatal mistakes to be made. Finally, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of State join me in asking both India and Pakistan to think first and foremost of the innocent people of Kashmir, who are literally caught in the middle of this crossfire and have been so for 70 years. Their human rights have been serially abused, their humanitarian needs have been neglected, their own wishes and about their own future have been treated as unimportant. No one in India, Pakistan or in this country wants yet another generation of Kashmiri children growing up facing the same cycle of instability, violence and fear that has afflicted their parents and their grandparents for decades. Only peaceful dialogue can break that cycle, and all parties must commit to engage in that dialogue.
May I thank the Right Honourable Lady, and I believe she's absolutely right that we absolutely want to see a broad-based dialogue. I think she's right. The whole House condemned the original attack that took place on the 14th of February. I have to say, obviously, the concern that one has about China's veto obviously is not, unfortunately, isolated to issues around Kashmir. There are other areas, not least in relation to the Rohingya population from Burma, which, as she well knows, that the prospect, at least, of a veto and of a lack of cooperation doesn't make life easy within the UN Security Council. And, of course, there are other organisations, such as the European Union and indeed the UN Human Rights Council, where we will try to utilise as much of the muscle that we can, again, in collaboration with other countries, to try to bring about the peaceable progress to which she refers. Mr. Speaker, if I can just touch on the issue that she did also raise in relation to the humanitarian situation. We recognise there are and have been long-standing human rights concerns in both India and Pakistan administered Kashmir. We believe that any allegation of human rights abuses is of great concern and has to be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently. I'd like to reassure that the House, as I did actually with a number of members here who were at the meeting of the APPG, which we had on the 23rd of January, that we do and will obviously continue to raise the issue of Kashmir, including human rights, at all opportunities with the governments of both India and Pakistan. But again, I would reiterate her words, and I think it is very important for us, with the importance of the diaspora that we have here, to make very clear that, as she rightly says, the worst of all worlds would be for many more decades ahead of the deprivation and humanitarian problems in Kashmir. We owe it in whatever way we can. And as I say, I do think that to intervene or interfere, to try and mediate in a broader way isn't necessarily the role for the United Kingdom. I think the role is, not least because of the diaspora here, to try and at least try and present there should be and must be a better future for future generations of Kashmiris. The last 70 years, obviously, we need, I think, to focus more attention rather on the past, but on a future. And I very much hope that one of the ways in which our own diaspora here can make a contribution is to try and help build up industry, to provide some prosperity for future generations of Kashmiris.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful that my honourable friend is here in the chamber today responding to this urgent question, an important question from the honourable member for Oldham Saddleworth. I'm very concerned, as many of us are, of the issues that have seen such violence in the region of Kashmir over the past few weeks. Would my honourable friend at least, though not playing a part as a negotiator or mediator, which I understand, do his best work in getting around the General Assembly of the UN and other members of the Security Council in encouraging those who are friends of both countries to help them get together and talk, at least in the margins of conversations, at least in the quiet corridors, so that when they get to the actual talks, there is a conversation to be had? And would he also ensure that those members of the UK population who have connections to Kashmir are able to support their families and support those who may have been cut off or in any way harmed by the economic shocks that will be affecting those in the region at the moment?
We shall do our level best. I think my honourable friend, I think, is absolutely right when he says that within the corridors of both New York and Geneva, there will be, I think, some very active conversations taking place. I should perhaps say, I think it is beyond simply friends of Pakistan and India. The realisation is that this is an extremely serious situation. Two nuclear powers in that part of the world, and it is therefore in everyone's interest to see as much of a de-escalation, but also, I think, with an eye towards trying to solve some of the underlying problems for the longer-term future. Can I just, if I may, just also, not least because the man to my right has a large Kashmiri population, and it is unfortunately the want of being a government whip that you don't have a chance to say very much. And I am well aware that my honourable I'm sure that you are looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to the day when I get elevated or demoted maybe to the whip size, whichever way one looks at it, for that reason. No, but on a serious note, I'm well aware that my honourable friend for Pendle, not least with one of the main towns in his constituency, Nelson, having a significant Kashmiri population, I know does a huge amount of work, and I know that applies to many members on all sides of the House.
And Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also thanks to the honourable member for Oldham East and Saddleworth for raising this important issue today. I'd also like to thank the Minister for his measured response to the situation to date. But the House will be concerned about the rise in conflict in this region, especially where the nations involved have access to nuclear weapons. Will the Minister ensure that the serious concerns raised in this House are relayed directly to the governments of Pakistan and India and at the highest level, and that the Foreign Office strain every sinew to make sure that both parties act with responsibility and restraint, and to insist that escalation is not an option? And finally, I think that many members have mentioned about positive and meaningful talks taking place, and I think in order to protect the civilian populations on both sides of the border and indeed within Kashmir, we need to ensure that these populations are not put at any further risk. And I know the government are focused on other matters at the moment, but I would also hope that the Minister or Foreign Secretary would be able to keep us up to date with developments on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his very constructive words. I mean, he is right. I mean, obviously, this requires a very nimble diplomatic approach. I have to say I've been encountered in the last 2 mornings a blizzard of diplomatic telegrams from Islamabad, from New Delhi, and indeed, of course, from New York, to recognise the huge amount of work that is going in from our diplomatic service, and trying to keep lines of communication open and trying to speak to individuals, both within the military but also, of course, at a political level. We will do our level best, obviously, as this situation does evolve and we are able to say more with more certainty to ensure that the House is kept fully informed.
The honourable gentleman, the member for Broadland, has just entered the chamber and is carrying with him, as per usual, a book. I note in passing something of which the honourable gentleman will be well aware, and that is that in his party, and what used to be my party, it was frequently said that to be seen carrying a book was dangerous, but to be seen reading it was fatal. Steve Baker.
Speaker, and I absolutely condemn the perpetrators of the initial act of violence, but I also condemn airstrikes in retaliation for what really could have been a crime, not an act of war. Thousands of my constituents will be alarmed about the prospect of escalation because they have families on not just one but both sides of the line of control. Will he join me in saying to the evil people who perpetrate acts of violence in political causes that they defeat their own ends by the revulsion and the horror that they cause?
I thank my honourable friend for Wickham, and I know full well that he has a significant Kashmiri population in his own constituency, not least because I've had a chance to meet them only in recent weeks. No, he's absolutely right. It is entirely self-defeating, and in many ways, what all of us want to see is some sort of normalcy within the Kashmir area, whether it is under Pakistani or Indian administration. But above all, the clearest way that would happen is if there is stability in that region, which will allow for economic prosperity. And one only has to look closer to hand, looking at our own situation in Northern Ireland. It was when the worst of the troubles of the 1970s and 80s were behind us that we were able to see some progress. We saw international investors feeling comfortable at being able to build businesses in that Northern Ireland country. And I think this is the great prize if we can de-escalate some of these long-standing issues within Kashmir.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Mr. Speaker, until his election, Prime Minister Modi was banned from entering the United Kingdom for his part in the Gujarat massacre, which resulted in over 2,000 Muslim deaths. As a Prime Minister, he has pursued a divisive, right-wing Hindu nationalist agenda that has inflamed tensions both in India and occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So instead of pointing fingers at Pakistan for the Pulwama attack, when will he look at his own record of persistent state violence, gross human rights abuses, as highlighted by the UN and the APPG in Kashmir, which has caused the rising of the homegrown insurgency in Kashmir?
Hear, hear.
I understand the heartfelt passion of the Honourable Lady, and let me just say this. It isn't relevant to this present situation. However, we all know that we are in a pre-election period within India, and that is one of the factors that obviously is a concern, and it's one of the reasons we want to see a de-escalation of this at the earliest possible opportunity to avoid any of the sort of issues to which she refers. But I think it is important that we, again, she will appreciate from the perspective of the Foreign Office that we want to remain strong friends on all sides, and to start condemning in the way in which she proposes, I think would only undermine our position in it, trying to bring both sides together.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
Can I ask that the government recognises the severity of the terrorist threat faced by India in relation to Kashmir, and that our government offers support where the Indian government takes measures that it feels are necessary to protect the security of its citizens?
Let me say to my right honourable friend, we will offer support to all governments that look to protect their civilian populations, but doing so in a way that is managed, that it is manageable, that is obviously not focused on an overreaction to what has happened. And whilst I appreciate, as she rightly says, that the attack on the 14th of February was one of the very worst single episodes going back for some decades, equally we would like to see a restraint on both sides, recognising the importance of trying to have a secure region, but also to ensure that civilian populations are properly protected.
Nasha.
Mr. Speaker, just last week I returned from leading a delegation from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to Pakistan, during which I met with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister assured the delegation of his commitment, reiterating wanting to have a peaceful resolution through diplomacy. I'm sure the Minister is aware that the central issue in all of this crisis is the issue of Kashmir, and until the people of Kashmir are not given their right to self-determination, nor will they be free, nor can we truly expect to see long-term peace between India and Pakistan. So will the Minister agree with me that now is the time to change our policy position on Kashmir and play a central role in helping resolve the issue that we played a part in creating when leaving the region as a colonial power? And will he also consider making an application to the United Nations Security Council with regards to this?
I must say, and the Honourable Lady will recognise that I don't agree with her prescription that we should try and intervene. I mean, the reality of the situation, is, I'm sure she's well aware, is if the UK government were to offer to try to mediate or to feel that it's our place to interfere, we would simply lose credibility, particularly with the Indian government, and therefore we would end up not being able to play the role that we do and trying to see a de-escalation of tensions. Our long-standing position is and must continue to be that for India and Pakistan have to find that political resolution to the situation in Kashmir through their own efforts, taking into account, obviously, the wishes, as she rightly says, of Kashmiri people. If we interfere, or prescribe a solution or purport that we can be somehow a mediator, I think it will very much undermine our position on all sides.
Well, I was going to call the honourable gentleman the member for Wickham, but he now seems very preoccupied with his... Oh, well, we've already heard the fellow. Oh, I shouldn't have forgotten so quickly. Anyway, I'll remind myself of the eloquence of his contribution in due course. Shailesh Bara.
Speaker, the Minister is taking a very fine line and trying to sit on the fence, effectively, mindful that there are diaspora from both Pakistan and India living in this country, and he is treading a very fine line as he progresses with his answers. However, may I say to him that where it is abundantly clear that the terrorists are living in one particular country, then can he give an undertaking to this House that the British government will make it absolutely clear to that host country that they should not be tolerating those terrorists who are engaging in activity in another country, and that they will face the full force of law?
My honourable friend will recognise that as a diplomat and as a Foreign Office Minister, sometimes the most effective way to make an argument to our counterparts is not through megaphone diplomacy. There are robust private conversations that will take place, and I don't want to go into detail as to what they say, but let me just say this. Clearly, we do understand there is a need and a desire for any country to act, but to act proportionately to secure its borders, to secure its people and indeed its military. But I think the idea that the UK should be robustly being seen to be on one side of this battle rather than another would actually be entirely self-defeating, and I think it is in the interest of us all to have a calm approach. Of course, we do not, will not in any way do anything other than criticise terrorist organisations. It's one of the reasons why the organisation Jaish-e-Mohammed for almost 20 years has been subject to a UN listing and has been prescribed in the UK for that period of time.
Profuse apologies to the honourable gentleman member for Wickham, on whose every word, as he knows, I ordinarily hang. My attention was momentarily distracted, but I apologise to him. Faisal Rashid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must express my grave concern and alarm over the ongoing escalation of the conflict between India and Pakistan in disputed Kashmir. War will benefit no one.